everyone. Welcome to the Incubator podcast. This is your co-host, Sabir Sran.
And this is Darren Boyd. And today we have a very exciting guest. We've got Nick Heudecker, who's a Senior Director of Market Strategy and Competitive Intelligence at Cribl. We're gonna turn it over to Nick here in a minute to introduce himself. But just before I do that, I do want to talk about Cribl. Sabir and I spend a lot of time with their product set and with their teams. Ed Bailey, Renan, Chris Hipskin, et cetera, et cetera. We've had wonderful experiences with Cribl because they make incredible products. But even before I go there, when it comes to making observability viable, they are absolute leaders in the space, but they're also disrupting the space dramatically. I really like watching, for example, or reading any of Clint Sharp's articles. So Clint is the CEO and co-founder. And because he takes a first principles approach when he's looking at problems, and we're a huge advocate for that kind of mentality. In fact, if you spend any time on our website, or if you spend any time with Sabir and I, we often talk about possibilistic thinking, which is kind of a derivative of first principles. And we feel it's the only way to take on large depth of field domains, observability being one. And so there's an affinity to Clint, the company, how they approach things, and we absolutely love how they're shaking up the space. Again, I think they're one of the ones that are completely redefining not only observability but making it viable, as I said. So we're really happy to have Nick here. We intend on talking about the products, directionality, where some of these customers are consuming and going. And so I'll turn it over to you, Nick, but a sincere thank you from some fanboys in the field that are getting great traction from Cribl. Thank you for joining us. I'll turn it over to you to do some intros. You'll do it better than me, and then we'll dive into the conversation.
All right. Yeah, thanks. And we love hearing that, right? We love working with our partners in the field and very customer first here at Cribl. So as you mentioned, my name is Nick Heudecker. I'm Senior Director of Market Strategy and Competitive Intelligence over here. I've been at Cribl for a little over 18 months now, and I've seen the company just on a rocket ship trajectory. I've never seen a firm grow this quickly. Prior to Cribl, I spent about 8 years as an analyst at Gartner covering the data and analytics space. That's where I met the co-founders when they were in their previous lives. And before that, I spent a lot of time running engineering teams, big open source bias, a lot of time in software development.
Thanks, Nick, for joining us again. So you mentioned the record growth at Cribl, and you guys are hot off a $400 million total fund or venture funds capital raised, if you will, from Sequoia and Greylock and amongst others. So that is indicative of the value the street is putting into Cribl and the value proposition. Now, maybe we can talk, Nick, about Cribl's origins with Cribl Stream, but then we really also want to go into kind of the multi-product offering now that has evolved towards Cribl Edge, Cribl Search, and Cribl Appscope. So, but if you wouldn't mind, for viewers that are either loosely familiar with Cribl Stream or the Cribl value proposition, let's talk about that from an observability context. If you can expand upon that for our audience, that'll be great.
Sure. Cribl Stream is an observability pipeline, and that means that it sits between the sources and destinations of observability data, right? You've probably heard a lot about this: logs, events, metrics, and traces. And so by sitting between the sources and destinations, you get a strategic control layer for where you want to route that data to. Multiple destinations is very common for our users today. What kind of format that data is in, and that means you might want to reduce it. If you've got null values or duplicate fields or white space, if you want to even convert logs into metrics for more condensed storage, you can do all of that in Cribl Stream. Additionally, you can enrich that data. So for cybersecurity use cases, if you want to add geo-IP information or reach out into a threat intel database for indicators of compromise, you can do that on an event-by-event basis in real time as the data is passing through. And then lastly, you can replay that data. This is something that a number of our customers in highly regulated industries particularly leverage. And this is around being able to take data, route it to low-cost object storage, and then be able to replay that on demand into any destination that you may want to send it to after the fact, right? If you're only maybe spinning off 20% of your actual data to your destination platform, and then you decide later on, we need some additional context here. You can replay all of that full fidelity data back into that platform and finish your investigation or whatever kind of work that you're doing, whether you're searching for fraud or et cetera. Does that help? Does that explain it?
Absolutely, Nick. So, many of folks that were early adopters of Cribl, went at it from the optimization from a cost standpoint and saying, hey, we can route traffic. But now with observability really taking place, you do have this need for greater insights, if you will, into the data that can traverse your or organization's pipelines. So what is Cribl's view of where observability is going, and how is that shaping your roadmap in terms of product development from Cribl Stream to where the direction is of the company?
Well, there's certain laws of physics you can't break. One of them is data volumes keep growing, right? I've talked to customers and we'll quote analyst numbers around, data is growing 30% a year. And their response is, that's our best case, right? Typically, we're seeing 50 to 60% growth. And their budgets are not growing at 50 to 60%, so they can't land all of that data. So they're always compromising on, well, what do I keep? What do I get rid of? And so our view is, since we allow you to make better choices about all of that data and what you're keeping, what's going to be valuable to you, you can actually observe a lot more about your environment because you've got all of this data, and now you can be much more surgical about what's worthwhile keeping. So we let you observe a lot more in your environment, getting a lot more value out of your destination platforms. I'll give you an example. If you're onboarding a lot of, say, Windows event log data, which is hugely chatty, and you're fully maxed out on your daily ingest rate, maybe you're at 5 terabytes a day, and the majority of that, let's say 5 terabytes a day of that is Windows event data. If we can trim that back by 30 to 60, sometimes as much as 80%, you've freed up a lot of headspace. And so now you can bring in new data sources that maybe you didn't have budget for. And so that lets security teams, infrastructure and operations teams get much more visibility and observability into their environment. So that's one aspect, right? Having a lot more control over that data, being able to make the right decisions for you. But then we're going to talk about some of the other products soon, but we also talk to companies and they've got data everywhere, right? The old idea of, well, I can have data and I'm just going to move it all to one centralized location. That's a fantasy anymore, right? Companies today, they might have 100,000 Windows instances that they have data trapped on. They might have data in various data centers in the cloud. And so our vision is we want to allow those companies to leverage that data wherever it is without having to move it first. Understand what value that data might represent, and then make a strategic decision about, do I move this or not? And if I choose to move it, where do I move it to? So for us, that's our vision of the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we see a few things in the field on this. So one, just to support what you said earlier, I think we're getting, in the Windows context, I think we have practical examples of just over 60% reductions just by removing some superfluous data and pushing it back to a lookup later. So that's real. We also have seen some like we're putting an abstraction in by decoupling source to sink, but that abstraction doesn't introduce much in terms of burden from the overall end-to-end performance either. So we've got, if anybody's curious, Sabir and I have some benchmark data too on what we're seeing practically speaking by putting Cribl in between, and it is phenomenal, even with some pretty advanced transforms, et cetera. But I think one of the coolest things that I think about when we look at the space is you are enabling experimentation from a platform perspective. Normally, we historically have been kind of locked in to various vendors, and by putting Cribl in and breaking that source to sink, we can really get creative at the edge. And so now we can bring in tools that make sense, sometimes bespoke tools, sometimes multiple tools. It's great from a migration perspective. It's great from testing perspectives. We send it into Cribl, and then we can route to any destination and change maybe even the data that goes to those destinations. So that's pretty powerful too. But if you take a look at, now you have products across the board, and they're all very, very interesting in their own right. Is Stream historically or still where most folks are starting. We typically advocate for starting with an observability pipeline for some of the reasons I just articulated. But is that what you're seeing as well in the market, that people tend to start with Stream before they start looking at some of the other product mix, or is that starting to shift now?
No, it's definitely Stream first. That is our strategy. We feel that is incredibly differentiated. No one else in the market is doing what we're doing when it comes to observability pipeline work. And there's such a strong value story, right? Like, I can get you more value. I can get you 30 to 60% more value out of your existing platforms in a few days or weeks. And then when it comes time to renegotiate, you're in a stronger position because now you've got much more control. So Stream is a very compelling offering out of the gate. And then over time, we will expand our offerings in a given client to Edge as well as search.
Well, maybe let's segue right into Edge here, Nick. So we talked about Stream and helping to establish that pipeline. You can visualize, you can see your data, and collect it and appropriately route it. What is the concept of Edge? And perhaps maybe we can also compare it or talk about its context within what Open Telemetry is doing as a project as well, in terms of the Edge collector that they have. And what is the kind of, how does Cribl Edge actually fit into the larger equation here?
Well, Cribl Edge is a first principles rethinking of what should an agent be today, right? If you look at the agent landscape, there's typically pretty poor management. Configuration is brittle, and the agents don't do a whole lot for you, right? Our audience is infrastructure operations and cybersecurity professionals. And so we want to make their lives easier. So Edge is an agent that doesn't require any configuration. It looks for anything that looks like a log file and begins to monitor those log files. And so you can begin to search those log files directly on the system. You can also use capabilities in Edge to teleport to a remote server and start to do debugging and troubleshooting directly using the capabilities in Edge, because we're not supposed to SSH into servers anymore. So but we still need a capability to do debugging and all the usual sysadmin work that we have to do. So Edge adds all of those capabilities in addition to being a unified agent. Now, it's important to note, you don't have to use Edge, right? It is an optional component. We would never presume to say, you must deploy this agent, but it does offer new capabilities. If you're in, like, say, the middle of an upgrade cycle, Edge can be a very compelling upgrade to all of the different agents that you might be running on one endpoint. And from our surveys, most companies are running between 12 and 15 different agents on a given server or instance. So it does simplify things quite a bit.
Yeah, it's almost.
I should also add, sorry to interrupt. All of the capabilities of Cribl Stream are also in Edge. So if you want to start moving data from Edge instances into, through Stream into, say, a Splunk or an Elastic or what have you, you can start to eliminate data and reduce data directly at the edge. So you're not paying network costs to move that information over. So you get all those capabilities embedded into your Edge agent.
Yeah, that's what I was going to point out. Well, first I was going to say, man, how did we get here? 12 to 15 agents per system. It's such a rough thing for people to manage these days.
Yeah, it's a lot, and the performance hit, right? And the potential security impact, like it's a lot. It's a lot.
So I was just going to say the same thing, because I was going to say that I believe that you can use the same packs that you would use on Stream down at Edge, and so you learn in any one of the environments. It directly translates, which lowers the friction to adoption. Like it's a really well laid out design. And I forgot all about the ability to teleport, because that is a huge feature. But as you were talking, it's hard not to jump between products, because your products work so beautifully together. Like when you were talking about debugging, I was thinking right to search, and when you were talking about the value of this agent, I was thinking about Appscope and that idea of a universal agent. So it's so hard not to jump around, because you've got such a complementary set of products. So when do I use Edge and when do I not use Edge? So if I like the idea of Stream, I like the idea of saying, hey, I've got this compliant facility, send all your data to it. And then we can collectively decide where it goes, and I can manage this pipeline. And we can do some really cool things with pipelines. When do I decide, or what is one of the factors or some of the factors that would decide, hey, you know what we should really do? We should also include edge. And I don't know if it's something like a teleport function or if it's just a data capture element. What helps drive the edge conversation in an existing customer?
The main driver for a customer to consider edge, there's two. One is I'm going through an upgrade cycle and I'm looking for a way to get more bang for my buck on that upgrade cycle, right? Instead of having to continue to keep running all these different agents, whether it's for SIMs or something else, I can consolidate on one and I don't have to configure them, right? Edge is smart enough to go find log files on its own. So that's one. The other is if you've got data at the edge and you're not quite sure you need it, right? Going back to the Windows instances again, or that example, if I've got 100,000, 150,000, maybe 300,000 Windows nodes, it is cost prohibitive for me to be able to go to every one of those instances and move that data into one location. Edge gives me the capabilities, especially as we continue to roll out search throughout the course of the year. I can go ask those interesting questions over entire fleets of edge agents. Is something interesting happening there? Well, if there is, let me move that data. That's going to be relevant for me. So from a security perspective, right, and this is becoming, a board level topic in a lot of companies, edge lets me find out what's happening without making it an all or nothing conversation. I can be much more surgical in what data I want to bring into my analytics platforms. And I can do that with a combination of edge and stream. So those two products, to your point, are incredibly complementary.
Nick, certainly, as Darren was going down, and you just highlighted in terms of where to think about edge, right? We have customers and clients that are, as observability is taking shape, really following and tracking the open source community with open telemetry. So where should organizations, how should they think about open telemetry? Because some of the principles, again, that Cribl is following embody 100% all of what OpenTelemetry is stating. You guys focus on the protocol. You have a supported platform. So how do we overcome this confusion of, does an organization need to go towards OTel per se, or is everything already baked into Cribl? It's supported, and hey, it's a one-stop shop at the end of the day.
So this is where I get in trouble. I am not a fan of OpenTelemetry, I will admit. I've never seen innovation come from a consortium of vendors that all have their own dogs in the fight, right? So I don't believe that the promise of OpenTelemetry will be delivered because there's too many incumbents in the space that want to protect their revenues, right? So the idea of a universal collector that everyone's going to adopt, it doesn't seem plausible in the long term. I think a lot of new companies, as they're coming up, they're glomming onto this idea of OpenTelemetry because it lets them tell a much more inclusive story. But I think the more incumbent vendors in the space they're looking to protect their revenues, I just don't think that it's really going to live up to its promise.
Yeah.
The other challenge with OpenTelemetry is one of timing, right? I mean, they're not. The project is well intended, but it's not moving very quickly. And so, you're seeing vendors that are saying, we're supporting all these different parts of OpenTelemetry, even though the standards aren't done yet. Mm-hmm. So what you're deploying today may not be the thing that actually ships 6 months from now. So now you've got to redeploy all of those things if you choose to, or you may see proprietary vendor extensions within OpenTelemetry, just like you do in SQL, right? I'm an old data guy, so my head always goes there. So my concern is that OpenTelemetry is not going to live up to its potential. And I know I'm going to get some very angry emails about that statement. But that's where I'm at, right? And the other side of it is OTel is very much developer focused, right? And we talk about APM here in a bit, but OTel is very much developer focused. It's not really infrastructure and operations or security focused. Yeah. And so those people have not been in this conversation as far as I can tell. And so they continue to be an underserved market. And that's where Cribl has really thrived.
No, I appreciate the transparency, Nick, and the honesty overall, because we're struggling with that, and that's why I was pushing on this topic, is because clients are starting to grapple with that situation, but we ourselves see the consortium of vendors there, and they're all on different stages of Do we support it? Yes, everyone supports it, but to what degree is going to vary. So how, as an organization, do you start to kind of grapple with this situation? Whereas, hey, you can look at Cribl, and Cribl focuses on observability and protocol support across your universe of data. So effectively, it's not only a time to market, but it's actually a simplified architecture and gets you to, serves the organization really well across all the platforms that an organization might be using for APM or other reasons. So appreciate that.
Yeah, and one thing on that too, like I think even on your site, I like how you put it. I think you say you support radical levels of choice and control, and you certainly, with the capabilities, especially with what you're introducing now, you've introduced a low friction way of collecting all the signals, and now doing context propagation. And so when you put Appscope into the mix too, I would suggest that you have achieved what OTel was looking to deliver, which is, hey, I can make it very easy to collect. I can find all your data. Now I can give it context and propagate that context into whatever system you want, because you can go through Stream or Edge. And so now you're agnostic, and you can make that very simple for folks. So let's talk a little bit about Appscope. And is there anything else we want to cover on Edge? Because Appscope, I think, is starting to get like really, really cool. Is there anything?
Appscope's pretty cool, and we're actually embedding it into Edge, so the conversation is one and the same in a lot of ways.
Okay, so okay, I'm glad you said that, because we're talking like, I don't need to re-instrument, I don't need sidecars. It's an interposing function, so it's in between the function calls, and it makes it very, very simple. It is that universal agent. So I was going to ask, is this an extension of Edge? But that sounds like that's where it's going. So can you walk through Appscope a little bit, and then we'll see where the conversation flows from there.
Yeah, so Appscope is a black box instrumentation utility that works with any Linux binary. And so it effectively, it's a shim that sits between the application and system calls. And so you can turn it on, you can turn Appscope on for any process, and then start to get information about what files is the application opening, what is it connecting to on the network, what data is flowing across, and so on. And then you can turn that data off. Oh, I should also mention that because Appscope sits before libcrypt on the system call, we actually get clear text data. So we can see what all your payloads look like as well. And you can then send that data onto Cribl Stream, pre-process it with Cribl Edge, et cetera. And then once you're done collecting all of that data, you've got all the information that you want, you can then turn off Appscope's instrumentation with no impact to the running process. So it's really pretty cool, right? Yeah. Instead of having to, if you're on the operations side and you want to find out what's happening on a process, you don't have to go back and beg developers to add instrumentation code to their application, because they don't care. It's not their job, right? Their job is to ship features and product. Your job is to run it. You don't have to go back hat in hand. You can just turn it on when you need it for as long as you need it, and then turn it back off. This is hugely powerful when you're trying to diagnose a runtime issue.
And that's really interesting too, because I didn't consider there might be almost a sampling that you can do in real time. Are folks once they get it configured appropriately, and what I love about this too is it supports frameworks like Red and Use and things that folks actually want to get out of their system. It supports it out of the gate. Lots of like I said, propagation. But when people get it configured, do they tend to leave it on, or is that just starting to generate too much data if it's collecting? What do people do?
It's typically too much data. Yeah, it's too much data. So every company goes through a kind of a genesis process, right? Of like, what's my product market fit? The original origin story for Cribl was this idea of Appscope, right? Be able to instrument anything. But when the co-founders went and talked to companies about it, the response was, that's an awesome idea, but I would blow through my licenses because it's too much data. And so then the co-founders thought, well, let's go solve that problem first. And so that's how we got to where we are. But no, once you've got Appscope up and running, like you use it typically very targeted, or for discovery. Like some of our engineers they will run Appscope on literally anything in their house. And so you get to collect a lot of interesting information. So just that kind of like discovery process is also super interesting.
Yeah.
Well, okay, Nick, so how should an organization leverage? You said, you could start being very targeted or wider spread in terms of Appscope. How do organizations, enterprises actually start to leverage Appscope as part of their ecosystems on the APM side?
Well, it's not an APM tool.
Right.
I will, full disclosure, not an APM tool. It is very much for debugging operational and runtime types of problems. I'll give you an example. One of our early customers was having problems with a very old C++ application, right? It wasn't starting. And of course, for really old applications, the whole business runs on it. And they couldn't figure out what was going wrong. They used an early version of Appscope and were able to determine that someone moved a configuration file, because we could see in the line items that, oh, I'm looking for this file, I failed to open, I just fail silently, and then I don't start up. But using Appscope, they were able to determine, oh, that file is not where it's supposed to be, let's put it back. And they were able to get up and running again. So those kinds of like just, case by case types of troubleshooting issues. If you want to collect metrics from, say, a Kubernetes environment or anything like that, you can turn that on as you need it and then turn it back off. If you want to collect data from, say, without having to deploy a sidecar, you can also use a combination of Edge and Appscope for those types of use cases as well. So it's really up to you, right? We don't, we can certainly offer advice, but we're not prescribing, you must do this or do that. It has a variety of different use cases.
It's as you're going through some of these things, Nick, two things come to mind. One, well, first is a question. When was Appscope released as GA? Like, it's not that long ago, right?
Well, the 1.0 came out
like 21 or?
Yeah, I think April of 2021 is when, we actually did a product release on April Fool's Day of 2021.
You guys are
April
fools.
Correctly. Yeah.
Okay, so the one that's really interesting. Like the rate with which you're disrupting, like you're not just releasing products, you're disrupting areas is pretty phenomenal. Like that trajectory is pretty phenomenal. And then as you were describing, and I told you it's really hard to talk about Cribl without bouncing around, because it almost tells us this beautifully preordained story. I don't know if you just have some mad scientists with Clint and the other founders, and this was just part of the plan, or if you just happen to be really good at taking customer feedback and building things that make sense. But it almost plays out like this beautiful story, because now we're up against search, and search ties into all of this so beautifully as well, where, hey, like when I look at customers, they have data all over the place, and it is not just melt data. It's all sorts of data that I need to debug, and it's historically very difficult. You've created this facility where I can send to any place, but the reality is I've got data all over the darn place. And so with Appscope, with Edge, with Stream comes search. And again, it feels like this is I don't know if it's beautiful in hindsight or if this was just always preordained, but it's just such a great story. Can you walk us through how search fits into all of this, and a little bit of its principles in terms of design?
Yeah. Well, I can answer the first part of that by saying, this is all me. This is like I'm the genius. Like I'm the guy behind the curtain. No, it's a combination of like really smart people and talking to customers, right? Having empathy for like what they want to do, and like, okay, here are the problems. Can we build a business around this, right? Where the customers are getting value, we're getting value, and does it work for everybody? And if you can do that, right? If you're willing to be disruptive and not say, all right, well, this is how it's always been done, let's just do that. Like that doesn't make any sense for anybody anymore. It's too competitive. You've got to have the fortitude to kind of think about things from a first principles approach, which is what we're really good at here. Now for search, right? Data's everywhere. The old model for search of forward it someplace and then do something with it only benefits vendors, right? It leads to a lot of lock-in. That data is not your data anymore. I think it's one of the really big challenges. You don't get to do whatever you want with it. And so we thought, all right, what's the market reality? Well, the market reality is, as we've been talking, data's everywhere, right? It's at the edge, right? And the edge for us is where stuff happens, right? It doesn't need to be an oil rig or anything like that, like a typical IoT kind of edge bias, but it's where stuff happens. It's your laptop, it's your phone. And there's a lot of data there, but it's very expensive to move if you don't know there's something valuable in that data set. So let's let people search there as well, right? With our edge agent. But data is also passing through in real time as well. So they're going to need to be able to search for stream, maybe in like some kind of ring buffer that stores 48 hours of data. Let me do a search against that. Maybe I'll do some threat intel against that as that data is passing through. And then everybody's got data lakes, right? Looks a lot like S3, a lot of different other data stores at rest. Let's also search against that, and let's do all three of those at the same time, right? And so over time, I think search is going to turn into almost like a marketplace, right? Where companies are building products on top of Cribl search. I think the next great SIM is going to be built on top of Cribl search, personally. But I think this is going to continue to grow and have much more momentum and impact the entire observability and security data space for some time to come.
That's what you just said, Nick, was exactly where my head was going in terms of the SIM space and how, or a particular persona really might be impacted immediately from leveraging search. So is that a persona you see is kind of, if anything, maybe a low-hanging fruit, if you will, for a value is for the security operations personnel to complement whatever SIM they may have today, but now leveraging Cribl search to augment and facilitate some of, the discovery processes, threat detection, things of that nature. And is that a leading one, or is it at the same level of utility, if you will, for operational folks that are just looking for, your typical outages and things of that nature and root cause analysis? Is there any lead-in that you see between the two personas there?
Well, we've been doing a lot of customer interviews, and the answer is yes, right? Like if you talk to a security persona, it's, I want help with the discovery work, right? And, my background is in data and analytics, and I've always thought of a data lake as a question development environment, right? How do I figure out the things I don't know? And so Cribl search is a great ally for figuring that out. And then once you figure out the question you want to ask, take that data, refine it in stream, and then send it onto a destination platform that's more targeted, that offers unique analytics for whatever problem you're looking to solve. That could be cybersecurity, right? Or that could be an operational use case of anything from fraud detection to performance challenges. And so just being able to have access to that data and do what you need to do with it is what really makes it a differentiated offering.
It's all in terms of architecture. I know you're using Custo for the query language KQL, which is really optimized for this, which is pretty cool. But the infrastructure as well, I believe, is an on-demand infrastructure. It's cloud native, and it instantiates at the time of querying, and then pulls back afterward. And so there's ephemerality in the architecture. Do I have that right? Is there anything to add to that perspective?
I think that is an accurate representation today, right? Okay. We are still actively working on all the facets of search. We'll have much more to say later this year.
Okay. And it's targeted late 22 for GA, or maybe early release.
Yes.
Okay, late 22. Is this, because the one thing we kind of sort of talked about was Cribl 0 to 1, your innovation department. Is this one of the products that came out of that? Because I think Cribl 0 to 1 is a fairly recent formalized department in Cribl. Is this one of the first products that came out of that new space?
It is currently being developed by Cribl 0 to 1,
okay.
Which is kind of our incubator lab.
Yeah, so with the degree of innovation that you've done to date, it's going to be really interesting to see what comes out of this new formalized group. So we're excited about that. But Nick, I'd say like this has been helpful, and it's no surprise that we are, most of our large enterprise customers are Cribl Stream customers, right? Full stop. We're starting to get interest in some of these other product offerings. I will say there are lots of customers or lots of vendors that grow via acquisition or even organic, that their products don't come together very nicely. And fine, folks like us, we come in and we can help with that, and that's often what keeps us busy. But your products come together so beautifully, and we're excited to keep going further.
I do have a question on that, though.
Oh, please.
Nick, how is Cribl search? Well, it's coming out for GA. I forget the time frame around.
Late 22.
Late 22.
Yeah.
How is that going to be licensed? Just out of curiosity, in terms of, I know the traditional model for Cribl Stream, but if we have customers that come to mind that are like, hey, we can't wait to get this, how should they start thinking about Cribl search from a license?
Well, we want to talk to them because this is a conversation we're still actively having.
Okay.
We know from experience that things like this, they need to be predictable. So we're still working on what the ideal pricing model is going to be for search. And predictability is one of the main things that we hear repeatedly. So TBD is the best I can answer right now.
No, well, that's great, because I think as we've talked about in terms of how Cribl develops and also incubates some of these ideas, the customer feedback loop is very important. And it becomes interesting for what we just talked about a few minutes ago with some of the personas that would be really interested from a SOC perspective, right? It's your SIM base, and how this really kind of accelerates the value proposition for them. And the next generation SIM, if I may call it that, would be built on top of something like a Cribl search. So I think they'd be excited to understand that dynamic, as well as how they can consume search. So would love to support those conversations. And lest I ask, what's next on the product roadmap? You guys are on a tear here.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Before you answer that, I imagine there are traditional vendors that looked and said, ooh, okay, so they came up with pipeline. We're still safe. Wait a minute. Edge is starting to encroach on our agents. Appscope definitely. Search is probably making a lot of people nervous. Yeah, what is next? And yeah.
Well, we don't tell a takeout story, right? I think that is a path to a lot of pain for vendors, right? To walk into a prospect and say, "Hey, here's my new product. Rip out all the other stuff that you've been doing." Search is designed to be complementary, right? Like, people build their careers around the products that they're using today. It's pretty arrogant for a vendor to walk in and say, don't get rid of all that stuff, right? Don't worry about it. We got something brand new. Search for us is complementary. Edge is complementary. Stream is complementary to everything else that you're doing, and no one else is doing anything like it. And I think, to your comment about the products working beautifully together, the real difference, I think, for Cribl engineering is the people that are building the products today are people who did the job before, right? They know the kind of pain that happens if you have poorly integrated products. And so we do everything to make it, once again, empathy for our customers. And so that's where we fit. As far as what else is on the product roadmap, you'll have to stay tuned. We just released our 3.5 release of Cribl Stream and Edge. And we announced our Cribl Certified Observability Engineer program. That's all free. You can go do that and get your certification. There's 2 levels to that. There's user as well as administrator for the Cribl product suite today.
Yeah, I'll reiterate too that earlier statement I made of radical levels of choice and control. You're right. You work beautifully with the ecosystem. I would encourage anybody to follow Nick, to follow Ed Bailey. Like, he's a great example of a practitioner who's been there. He's got some stories and some scars. And then, of course, follow Incubator. For if you go to our website, we've got a whole perspective on this space of observability. Cribl fits into it beautifully. We thank you for being such a wonderful partner, Nick. We thank you for being here today, and we're happy to address any questions that anybody has as a follow-up.
Perfect. And thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Love working with you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nick.